Alright, in this lesson we're going to be taking a look at some of the unique properties that are found on mental ray lights. Alright, so when it comes to actually adding lights into your scene, we actually have a couple of different methods or a couple of different options that we have to choose from. Now if we take a look at these, found underneath this Create panel, and let's take a look at the lights, we actually have a couple of different light types. One is photometric lights, which actually are meant to behave in a much more realistic way and mimic the properties of a real light emission source. And we also have the standard lights. Now, within these standard lights, we also have a couple of different options. One is some of these target and free lights. These are pretty much default max lights. But down toward the bottom, we have a couple of special lights. These are two mental ray lights. One is an omnidirectional light, which emits light out in all directions, and one is a mental ray area light, or a spotlight. Now, for the most part, there is very, very little difference between a typical max light and a mental ray light. The main differences become apparent whenever it comes time to do shadows and things like that. So if I take a look at this spotlight, which is my main shadow casting light in the scene, take a look at the modify panel for this, and right now we can use shadows, which are no problem in mental ray, but we also have a lot of different options that are found in here as well. Now, only a couple of these can actually be used by mental ray. One is a mental ray shadow map, and the other is ray trace shadows. Now, if I use ray trace shadows and render this out, these ray trace shadows are always going to give me some kind of a sharp result. All right, so we get these very, very sharp, detailed shadows, which in some cases may be exactly what you want, but in some cases you may actually want to get some kind of a more realistic type shadow, which would actually start to kind of dissipate and get a little bit fuzzier as it gets further away from the shadow casting source. So what we should see is a nice, sharp shadow that's very close to the shadow casting source. And then as we get further and further away, we should start to see a little bit more fuzziness that starts to get introduced as we get further away from this object. Now, unfortunately, the attributes that are built into this particular light, a lot of them don't work with mental ray. So, for example, with this light, this is a default max light. We do have the option to use something like area shadows. Now, once I enable that, we have a new rollout for the area shadows. Now, all of these options will not transfer over into mental ray. These are to be used really with the scanline renderer. So, what we need to do is, if we want to be able to utilize soft shadows, there are soft shadow parameters that are on the mental ray lights. So, if we were to, let's say, drop in another light, maybe say a mental ray omnidirectional light. Oops, let's actually delete that. Make sure we are using a mental ray omnidirectional light. If I select this and take a look at its parameters up here, we also have this light. It is now set to use ray trace shadows, but if you take a look, there is an area light parameter for this particular light, and these attributes or these properties will transfer into mental ray. Alright, so we do run into a little bit of a problem though, because we've already got our lights set up over here. So how can we get away from actually having to just throw this light away and start new, especially if we already have this light set up just the way we want, as far as maybe it's emitting caustics into the scene, maybe it's got the light intensity that's set up just the way we want it. We can actually use a max script to turn this mental ray light, or turn this max light, into a mental ray light. So if we go over to the utilities, scroll down, and we want to look for the max script button. Select this, and if you don't have anything listed underneath this utilities, you should already within Max have a little utility for convert to a mental ray area light. So any light that we have selected, whether it's a spotlight or an omnidirectional light from Max, we select that, choose the script, and now we just choose convert selected lights. Convert that. It's going to ask us, do we want to delete the old lights? Most likely you will want to. And now it's taken this old spotlight that we had and replaced it with a mental ray spotlight. Now the beauty is that it's also inherited all of the different parameters that we already had set on that existing light. So we really haven't lost anything. And now that this is converted to a mental ray light, We can set this back to use ray trace shadows, which is what mental ray can use. And you should notice now we have this new area light parameters rollout that we can use on this newly created light. So for this one, we have a type. So basically what this is going to try to do is simulate, instead of light coming from one single point, it's going to try to simulate light that comes from a little bit larger area, which is how a lot of light really does behave, instead of coming from some kind of a pinpoint of light. So in this, we can choose whether or not this is going to be a rectangular type object or a rectangular type shape that this light is going to be emitted from, or something a little bit more of a rounded kind of disc-like shape. In my case, I'm going to leave this set to a rectangle. And let's just see what we have with this. Alright, so overall, these shadows are still relatively sharp. But if you look very, very closely, you can see that there is now a little bit of softness that's up kind of toward these further ends. So if we come back and take a look at some of these parameters here, what we want to actually adjust is this height and width. What these are basically saying is to kind of simulate a larger area that this light is going to be kind of emitted from. So if we change the height and width, let's say maybe to just 5 and 5, we should get light that comes from a little bit larger area, and as a result gives us a little softer, more spread out shadows. Alright, and there we go. That's exactly now the effect that we start to get. And again, the higher this number is, the more diffuse or the more spread out these shadows are going to become. Actually, I'm adjusting the wrong parameters here. The height and width are going to be responsible for this. The samples are what is going to be responsible for controlling this noise that we have as a result of these soft shadows. So a lot of times what we'll have to do is come up and begin increasing these samples to kind of help counter that. Now, be careful with these sample settings, because as these numbers get higher and higher, you really will start to notice a very significant increase in your render time. So definitely be aware of these. Try to keep these as low as possible as you're doing your testing, and then you can start to bump that up when you're ready for a final full quality output. Alright, very nice. So that's a look at how we can start to actually take a max light and convert that into a special mental ray light, as well as some of the area light parameters that are contained on these mental ray lights, so that we can start to get these really nice, soft, diffuse shadows.